what we're going to talk about today, and the most important thing that you can do is ask questions. But we all bring a different approach to what happens with a theater organ, and it's an interesting instrument. By now you know all the basics. It makes a bunch of different sounds, but depending on how the person wants to sit down and approach it, it can be musically representative of any number of different eras and different styles of music. Because of when I started playing, because of, I think, geographically where I lived, and because of my early musical influences, I gravitated towards a very traditional style of playing. And that doesn't mean that I can only play a ballad that was written before 1923. That's not the case. But I mean by a more traditional, melodic, lyrical, certain kind of harmonic thinking approach to how I look at any piece of music, even whether it's Sondheim or something newer. And it's because my early influences that I was lucky enough to mentor with and work with some and just absorb from, and then in some cases had the great fun of developing friendship with a number of who I considered really, really top-notch musicians. My four main influences for playing the organ were pretty diverse. They weren't all theater organ, but it was George Wright in Southern California, Richard Elsasser, who was a classical organist on the West Coast, and a brilliant performer, incredible talent, and Richard Purvis in San Francisco, who was a very romantic classical organist, but who had great ear and sense of color and style and shape and how you put a piece of music together. Purvis had no discrimination between that you should learn something just as carefully and accurately, whether it was a piece by J.S. Bach, whether it was a French Romantic piece by Vierne or Widor, or whether it was a ballad by Jerome Kern or George Gershwin. He used exactly the same approach and the same care. And so that was a great influence. And my fourth influence had nothing to do with theater organ, but it was Virgil Fox, and who became a really good friend. And it seems like a disparate group of people, and yet there were threads that went through all four of those. And I noticed that when we would talk about something, I kept noticing these same items, being talked about. One of the important things are what I kind of realized that I boiled down to what I call the 4 C's. And they're just as applicable to Dave Brubeck as they are to Henry Mancini, as they are to Stephen Sondheim, as they are to Lady Gaga, believe it or not. And that's the things that I call color and contrast and continuity and cleanliness. They work together. They're not all, it's not like you just think about one and then throw the other 3 out the window. But by color, I mean the fact that, okay, whether it's this or whether it's a combo, it's nice if after 16 measures of the body of a certain piece of music has been just with some sound, even if it's, lead guitar with no vocal and second guitar and drums, if then something is going to happen for the next 16 measures, okay, maybe it's the one lead guitar drops out and it's a vocal and a slight difference in the accompaniment. Something to come up with different colors. It's like my demonstration is, if there's a piece of music that is 7 minutes long. We won't sit through 7 minutes, but okay, pretend that this piece is 7 minutes long. And here's the introduction. Okay. Okay, here is the introduction, and then here's the start of the first part of it. And then the song has a bridge. Okay, now 4 more minutes have gone by, and now you've listened all the way through to where it's got even more exciting because it's changed keys and it's in the 4th chorus, and it sounds like this. Okay, I think you see what I mean. Well, maybe that color happens to be one of your favorites, and it was very nice in the first 8 measures. But by 7 minutes longer, most people have kind of dialed out and they're going, ugh. And so there's that problem. That's what I mean by color. The shape of it, it's a hard term because there's so much of, this is something that I admire so much about Mr. Eddington, is that so much of what I do is sensory and by intuition. And that's a hard way to do it. Not for me, but it's a hard way when it comes to try to explaining it to somebody else. Because I'm not much of a left brain linear person. I don't think in flowcharts and in yellow tablets and all that. Mr. Eddington has that wonderful ability to just constantly switch between both sides of his brain. So he can sense something intuitively, come up with an idea, but he also knows how to go to that other part of his brain to put it into very understandable terms to explain it so that you can go, oh, that's not only how you do that, but that's kind of why that works. That's a talent that I really admire because it's difficult for me. So by color, I mean just that variety of what is it you're going to hear. And in this instrument, it happens to come from registration, obviously, so that there's not just one thing constantly. Contrast is really kind of, color and contrast kind of go together for me. And that's why you could do different colors. For instance, out at the house, you know, we have, my heavens, I think 26 ranks of strings. And you could say, well, I'm doing color because I'm playing 4 measures on that pair of strings, then I'm playing 4 measures on that pair of strings, and you can do that, you know, 14, 13 times. Well, technically you are changing something, but that's what I mean by contrast. Okay, that's a very thin sound, there's not much fundamental in it, and so you're comparing apples to apples to apples all the way along. I like the contrast of something that goes from a very round, warm sound to something that is totally different, and even with tremulance and without tremulance, so that maybe there is even this. Let's see. So if you heard There's very, very wide differences in harmonic content, pitch, amount of movement of what something's doing on a tremulet. So that's what I mean basically by color and contrast.